Hey there, powerful soul. Welcome back. Today, we're going to have a conversation about the feminine approach that is going to catapult you in your feminine leadership and your impact and your success. And that is emotional resiliency. Emotional resiliency is a really important topic as it relates to your impact and your successes as an accomplished spiritual and feminine woman. And a part of emotional resiliency that I'm going to bring forward in this conversation that we're going to have today is really having a clear understanding of some experiences that you may have had that may have caused you to show up in some ways inside of the work that you do that are misaligned, that are not congruent, but also are not operating from that awakened feminine power that really radiates and magnetizes the people that you've been called to work with or for better opportunities. And emotional resiliency is one of those topics that sometimes people don't really consider when they think about feminine embodiment. Feminine embodiment has become this buzz phrase, this really popular, trendy topic that a lot of people are researching and wanting to know how can they be more feminine? How can they be more feminine as women, as lovers, and as leaders? Because women are starting to wake up and realize that for one, that's our natural state of being. And for two, they're realizing, I think I've been conditioned out of it. And for three, they want to know, well, how can I return back to that natural state of being so that I can experience more intimacy, more impact, more success as all of me without compromising, without self sacrificing the peace, our femininity, our love lives, even. And so we're going to talk about emotional resiliency and how that can impact you as a feminine leader and approaches that you can consider. Now, when we look at emotional resiliency, it's important to look at it like a muscle. If you are into fitness and you are working out consistently and diligently, and you're working those muscles and they're strengthening and they're getting stronger, and over time you start to actually see a physical representation of the work that you've been putting in with the weights, and you start to see some form, you start to see maybe some striations, even you start to see some muscle building. If you stop there and you never work out again, you never lift weights again, you never put the reps in again, over time, what could happen is your muscles could atrophy. Okay. And I want you to think about emotional resiliency in the same way. If you do not work your emotional resiliency, your emotional intelligence, your emotional mastery over time, it can atrophy. It's one of those things, as we hear the quote, if you don't use it, you will lose it. We don't want to lose it. We don't want to lose our emotional resiliency as feminine women, lovers, and leaders, especially when we're looking at our leadership, whether if you work for corporate and you have a high level leadership position, or if you have your own practice, or if you have your own business and you're an entrepreneur. Emotional resiliency is truly game changer for those who are able to rise above different types of challenges and those who tend to fall prey to different types of challenges and, unfortunately, sometimes self-sabotage. Now, another point is when you get to this arrival mindset. And so say you have reached a certain level of success inside of the work that you do, and all of a sudden you start to feel like, oh, I can breathe a little bit. And while it's good to be able to rest and relax, because I'm all about resting and relaxing, okay? Resting and relaxing is how we have a regulated nervous system. It's how we stay in our feminine power rather than constantly having to reclaim it. But it's also important to know the difference between resting and relaxing versus no longer working toward your own personal growth. And sometimes people tend to entangle the two, and they don't realize that in their resting and relaxing, they've kind of turned the switch off internally, and they've entered this state in their mind of, I've arrived, I made it, and I don't have to continue to do what's necessary for my inner growth, for my emotional resiliency, for me expanding my capacity and my bandwidth for holding more responsibility. And this is why we tend to see modern day high achieving women burn out. because sometimes they have not expanded their capacity and their bandwidth to hold more responsibility. And what tends to happen is they're packing on more responsibility, they're packing on more things on their to-do list, they're packing on more tasks, and they haven't expanded their nervous system's capacity to be able to hold more, and it crashes. And so, if you do not prioritize your feminine embodiment, if you do not prioritize your emotional resiliency, your nervous system will do that for you. And that's no bueno. That costs you time, that can cost you energy because of the recovery process, that can also cost you resources to have to invest in support for that recovery process instead of investing in support for your self actualization and your growth. Now, sometimes when we're looking at this part of arrival mindset, it can also hold you back when life happens, because life inevitably happens. Life be life in some time, okay? Sometimes we reach a lull inside of our businesses where the impact or the revenue isn't the same as it used to be. Sometimes we experience a loss or a setback or a challenge, some sort of an adversity that can feel like a curveball, that can feel like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. And if you haven't been developing that emotional resiliency muscle and you've kind of parked it somewhere and you haven't been connected to that part of yourself on a consistent basis, when life happens and a challenge shows up, an adversity shows up, something that you weren't expecting shows up, then that can really activate that part inside of you that was needing that emotional resiliency, that internal resource, that internal support. And it could cause you to get out of your feminine power and now enter into a state of survival mode. And when you're in a state of survival mode, this means that you are really not connected to this supernatural aspect of ourselves. We're connected to God and we're receiving ideas from God. And I'm going to talk more about that here in a moment with some actual examples. But it's really important to know, like, what is the mindset I'm in? And have I been working this emotional resiliency muscle so that when life inevitably is happening, I'm not falling prey to these adversities. Rather, I'm able to actually rise to the occasion because I have built the internal reserves. I have reserves in my bank account. It's just like inside of relationship programs. When I teach relationship programs, I talk about how if you have a bank account, right? And you make withdrawals out of that bank account, but you never make deposits. Over time, what is going to happen? You're going to deplete your resources, right? And so in love, if you are always making withdrawals from your partner, taking, and you never make any love deposits, over time, it's going to look like and feel like to the other person a one-sided relationship. It's not going to feel reciprocal. Same thing goes for us inside of our leadership as feminine women. If you're not making internal deposits consistently within yourself, and over time, what tends to happen is you start to feel depleted. Well, you've been withdrawing more and more and more, but you're not making deposits. And so it's really important to prioritize your emotional resiliency and checking your mindset so that you're able to stay on the up and up and continue to thrive and continue to be a high performer and continue to show up and do what you've been called and created to do without pulling the plug, without burning out, without feeling like the rug is getting pulled from underneath you, and then entering into self-sabotage mode. Now, self-sabotage is a really, really important conversation here. In fact, that's a big part of my work, is supporting accomplished spiritual women to permanently remove self-sabotaging patterns. And this was something that I discovered over the years in my work was a reoccurring pattern for many modern day high achieving women, where they would reach this certain level of success and all of a sudden they start to pull the plug. And I started noticing a pattern. Oh, sabotage. It's self-sabotage. So let's talk about it. I've experienced this myself, so I'm going to start with myself and then I'll talk about some people that I've worked with. Now, I didn't understand when I was self-sabotaging that I was actually programmed to do that. What do I mean by that? We're programmed through a combination of these cultural narratives that are out in the world. We're programmed through our own lived experiences. We're programmed through our ancestral lineages. And so we have all this information coming at us and within us that can later show up in the form of self-sabotaging patterns. Now, when I started my entrepreneurial journey some years back, I had no idea what self sabotage was. I did not know what any of this programming, I didn't know what any of that stuff was. I just knew that I had a calling. I knew that God had called me to work with really accomplished spiritual, feminine women and to support them in their self actualization journeys. I had no idea that some of the self sabotaging patterns that were starting to show up in my journey was because I was programmed to show up that way. I did not know that part of the reason I didn't always feel safe per se to radiate my feminine essence and to be more magnetic and to honor my beauty and adorn myself a certain way and show up in the world a certain way and to really own it was because I was programmed to hide my light. I was programmed to play small. I was programmed to hide and to shrink. And it wasn't a really obvious pattern. It was something that was really, it was subtle. It was hidden. It was really unnoticeable to myself. Now, people who know me and knew me back then, they probably would say it was obvious to them. But to me, I was living below my conscious awareness. I had no idea that I was doing this. I had no idea that this was something that was holding me back. All I knew was that I was starting to notice that I didn't always feel safe or comfortable around certain types of people, mainly women at this time. And when I would be in the room and I felt like I was being judged, or I felt like they were looking at me funny, or they were interacting with me in this really passive aggressive way, or I could feel the projections coming my way. You know, I'm a very sensitive woman with the gift of discerning of spirits. And so when these projections would come, I would pick it up and discern it. And I would notice, oh, they feel jealous, they feel some type of way. Well, I was programmed that when people feel jealous towards me, when people feel insecure towards me, when people feel some type of way about who I be, that I needed to tuck that away. I needed to put that away. I needed to shrink. I needed to dim my light. I needed to hide. And so what happened over time is when I would experience some type of success or I would put myself out there, and then I would start to notice that friends were acting a certain way, peers were acting a certain way. You know, several years ago, back in 2017, I was on the front cover of a magazine. And it was a big freaking deal at that time. I was talking about topics inside of my work at the time, which was trauma-informed recovery. And I was talking about the importance of your trauma work and not neglecting that on your personal development journey. That yes, it's important to do the mindset work. Yes, it's important to do the personal development work, but let's also do the trauma work. I was talking about this before trauma-informed phrases were even on the internet, before it was popular, before it was a buzzword, before it was something that everybody just started picking up. I was doing this years ago, and I started to notice that people were treating me kind of funny. You know, when people are interacting with you in a way like they switched up a little bit, and one minute they were acting like this and the next minute they're acting like that, and you're like, hold on, what's going on here? As spiritual accomplished women, we are very intuitive. We're very keen to the little subtleties and the changes that's happening in the atmosphere. And so you know deep down when you can discern and pick up that something has shifted, that something has changed in the atmosphere. And so I would notice these subtleties. I'm on the front cover of this magazine, and I'm being interviewed on the news, and I'm on all these podcasts, and I'm on all these platforms, and they're asking me about my journey, and I'm being very open, very transparent. And all of a sudden, people who were really close friends at the time, and my peers and my colleagues were mocking me. And something happened inside of me. The programming showed up. It's time to play small. It's time to dim your light. It's time to shrink. It's time to hide. And so as a result of this programming, I started to pull back. In fact, I remember I went through one of the worst burnout phases I had ever experienced in my journey around that time. And I believe I unconsciously manifested that as a form of self-sabotage. Now, I know that this may be confronting for some people to hear when we talk about, oh, I asked for that. Why would I ask for something that hurts me or harms me? Well, it's the wiring inside of our nervous system. It's the wiring inside of our brain. I didn't know when I was experiencing these patterns of self-sabotage that our nervous systems and our limbic brain is holding on to the memories of these lived experiences, and that the messaging inside of my unconscious mind was that I needed to show up a certain way to stay safe. I did not know that. No one teaches us this stuff in school. We don't really learn about this stuff until we start to go onto our own self-actualization journeys, and we're like, I am ready to do the work for real this time. For real, for real, for real. And I'm ready to stay devoted to it. Not just for a temporary result, not for a quick fix, not because I'm chasing this result and I'm trying to hurry up and make a whole bunch of money, or I'm trying to hurry up and get to this next level of success. I'm trying to hurry up and be better than her, but I'm devoted. I realize that this is a lifelong journey of constant growth, constant expansion, constant transformation, constant becoming, constant working towards self-actualization. You know, it makes me think about scriptures in the Bible where it talks about we are always being perfected. We're always working towards progress. And I believe sometimes we forget about that when we are in this high achiever mode as feminine leaders, and we're wanting to create success and we're wanting to go to the next level. We forget the importance of prioritizing inner work. And so I'm navigating this season of my journey, and I had no idea that the programming I had experienced was creating self-sabotaging patterns. And what started to happen was I would be offered speaking engagements, and this faux sense of imposter syndrome started to settle in. And I started to question if I was really good enough and qualified for those speaking engagements. And I started canceling paid speaking engagements. Now, I probably wouldn't have shared this story some years back because I was still dealing with shame about the self-sabotaging patterns I was in. But because I've done this work for quite some time now, I'm able to come and have this conversation with you because I've overcome it. But not only overcome it, I'm on the other side of it, and I have another powerful transformational story to share with you about what that looks like. And so as a result of me going back to the lab and reworking the way that my nervous system was having these experiences and being able to get the parts of my limbic brain, the amygdala, calmed down so it wasn't hijacking me and putting me in this alarmed state. And I was able to start to access the unconscious beliefs that were telling me to show up in this way. And I rewired and reprogrammed myself from all of that stuff. What happened is next time moving forward, when I was offered opportunities, I accepted them and I put myself in the room. In fact, back in 2020, I was invited to be one of the speakers and panelists for entrepreneurs inside of Atlanta, Georgia. And I was amongst actors. I was amongst people who were a part of the Black Panther costume designers, people who were in Hollywood as creative directors. Jason Weaver, the voice of Simba, and he played Michael Jackson, and all these different roles and positions he's had as an actor, was there speaking. And I'm around all these people, and I was thinking to myself, I did it. I did it. I'm not holding myself back this time. I'm allowing myself to be seen and to shine. And I posted those pictures on social media at the time, and I celebrated myself publicly. And I really allowed myself to take that victory in, to soak in that success, because I knew what it took for me to be able to get there. I knew the inner resiliency work that I had to work through and overcome in order for me to get there. And was it easy? No, none of this stuff is easy. Building the success you've built so far hasn't been easy, has it? But that's why we do it. We do it because we love a challenge. We do it because we signed up for the game of growth in this lifetime. We do it because we love being challenged. Oftentimes the issue is when the challenges come to us that we feel we didn't choose, and we haven't been devoted to our emotional resiliency process. And that's sometimes when people want to tap out or they want to press the pause button. And though pausing is good, and I believe pausing is good for a strategic reason, and I talk about that another day, we want to be mindful of making sure that we are prioritizing our emotional resiliency. So when these curveballs show up, for instance, you have something really successful happen inside of the work that you do, and you openly, publicly celebrate yourself, and somebody that you really cared about, really loved deeply, they don't celebrate you back. In fact, you can feel jealousy coming from them. Instead of you shrinking, instead of you dimming your light, instead of you hiding, this time you stand tall in that success. This time you say, you know what? I deserve this. I worked for this. I earned this. And I'm going to send compassion to this person, whether it's your friend, a family member, whomever it is. I send compassion to them that they don't have the emotional bandwidth to hold space in my success. But I'm not going to allow that to deter me from celebrating myself in this moment. Now, what I realized during this journey was the importance of being able to celebrate ourselves publicly. And this is something I walked with a client with before. You know, she had massive success. She had built a multiple six-figure company, an online business. And when she came to work with me, she was starting to notice that her emotional resiliency had dwindled. She was having some issues inside of her marriage. She was having some challenges inside of her business with comparisonitis, feeling some imposter syndrome. And I'm sharing this story because I have their permission, and there's a video testimonial on my website of them sharing all of this themselves. And so when you hear me share client testimonials, I have permission so that you're aware of that. Now, she comes to me and she's having these experiences inside of her marriage, inside of her business. And it's getting to the point where she's comparing herself to her competitors and living in her head so much where she feels completely disconnected from her feminine power and her creativity. And I believe that's one of the beautiful parts about our feminine essence is the creative aspect of being in our feminine. And when we are deeply embodied in our femininity and we're really connected to ourselves, we also get connected to Holy Spirit. We get access to God. We get access to that co-creative genius that's available for us. But when we're living in our head and we're starting to turn into over-functioning and maybe getting caught up in comparisonitis, looking at what our competitors are doing and what can we do to be better than them, that's not being in our feminine. And so during our work together, I was able to support her to, for one, get back in her feminine. And there were some different approaches that we used. One of the approaches that I used was a breathwork modality that supported the specific emotion that she was experiencing. Now, I say this because a lot of times you may not be aware of which somatic approach is correct based off of the emotion or the trigger or the activation that you're experiencing. And so sometimes we need a different approach depending on what's happening within us. The same approach I use to support a client to regulate their central nervous system is not the same approach I use to support a client to rewire their unconscious crippling beliefs. The same approaches that I use to support a client to shift their self-image is not the same approach that I use to support a client to up-level their emotional mastery. And so this is where some artistry comes in inside of my work. And we're pulling on different approaches that will support you best so that you're experiencing the transformation that you really desire. And so I supported this client to come back home to herself, to get back into her feminine essence, to stop living in the mind so much, reconnect with her heart. And she experienced some miracles inside of our work together. It was absolutely incredible to be a witness to it. And that's one of my favorite parts of this work is witnessing the growth, witnessing the transformation, witnessing the unleashing. It's like a miracle right in front of my eyes. I get so excited about seeing women realizing that there was even more available, despite what they've already experienced already. And that's one of the traps of the arrival mindset is there's no more available. That is such a lie. There's so much more available. I believe as long as we still have breath in our lungs and life in our vessels, there is always more available. And so She experienced some extraordinary outcomes in our work together. Radically transformed her marriage to the point where it felt like a new marriage to her. And she had shared that they were having the best sex they had ever had. She took her business to a whole new level where instead of living in her head and stressing or comparing herself to her competitors or scrolling on social media and feeling triggered all the time, and what are they doing and what's going on with them, and then not processing those triggers and going back into working and hustling mode, reconnected to her heart, back in her feminine essence, back hearing from God again. And you know what happened? She got a creative idea that got her her first 5-figure day. Not month, not week, day. I was blown away because I hadn't experienced that. A 5-figure day, and my client experienced that, and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on over here? And that's when I realized the power of this work. I realized that literally anything is possible when we are in alignment. And there were so many other beautiful experiences that she had, but it was such a wonderful testament to the power of returning to herself, prioritizing her emotional mastery, of up-leveling her emotional resiliency, because some things had shown up in her life, some things had shown up in her marriage, some things had shown up in her business, and it was time to up-level. But a lot of times people chase the next level. They want to scale their success. They want to make more money. They want to gain more visibility. They want to gain more followers. They want to get a promotion. They want to go to the next level, but they haven't promoted themselves first. They haven't scaled themselves first. They haven't up-leveled themselves first. And so we have to remember that the process of creation has not changed. It is be, then do, then you will have. And so we got to remember first things first. Who are we being when we're doing so that we can have? I was watching Shark Tank with the Mister, whom I call, it's my husband. I call him the Mister on these internet streets. We love watching Shark Tank. And Sarah Blakely was on one of the episodes, the founder of Spanx. And she was sharing a story on there that was not popular for some people. And she was giving advice to an entrepreneur. And she was telling her a story about when she was doing her work inside of Spanx, as she was building it in its infancy stages, she started to notice that bigger companies, her competitors, were starting to copy off of her idea. And she decided that instead of competing with them, instead of being competition focused, she decided to stay in her feminine essence. Now, she didn't say this, but I'm saying that. She stayed in her feminine essence. Why do I say that? Because she said she decided to stay creative focused instead. And that's the feminine approach way. That is the way where her emotional mastery kicked in. That is the way where she realized, I have the emotional resiliency to figure this out my way and to do it my way. I don't have to compete with them. I can figure out my own way and do it my way. It takes emotional resiliency to do that. And as a result, we all know that she went on to build a $1 billion company. Amazing. Absolutely incredible. Now, did Sarah Blakely have the same lived experiences as some of us? I don't know. Did Sarah Blakely experience some of the same adversities, setbacks, and challenges as a non-BIPOC woman? I don't know. But what I do know is that at a pivotal moment where she could have went left or right, she was able to choose her way. And I believe that is the feminine approach. Now, the approach that we're often taught and conditioned in the world is to compete with our competitors when we notice that they are doing shady things, or they're trying to take from us, or they're trying to copy us, or they're trying to be like us. When instead we continue to be conscious co-creators, and we co-create. And we do what we've been called and created to do, which is what I believe I do and what I support modern high-achieving women, accomplished spiritual women to do. But in order to do that, we have to have a level of emotional resiliency. And that emotional resiliency is a muscle, and it is built with consistency and with devotion. And there are certain approaches that we have to remember and be mindful of when we're experiencing certain triggers and certain activations and having certain experiences internally to make sure that we're aligning the approach with the state that we're in. Because I see so many people doing all these different types of really forceful breath work when really what they need is something more gentle for their nervous system. I see so many people doing all this crazy movement when really what they need is a different approach. And so this is where we have to understand, I may not know what the correct approach is. I was there. When I got into combining my understanding of the trauma-informed piece, because I had a former career where I used to work with juvenile adult offenders who had experienced, they had committed crimes essentially because they had been either under the influence of drugs and alcohol, they had mental health challenges, they had behavioral issues. I say all of that was a symptom of trauma. I had that awareness nearly 2 decades ago when I started working in that field. I no longer work in that field, but when I was working in that field, I had that awareness back then. Well, they've been traumatized. That's why they're coping, they're numbing, they're reacting, they're showing up in these ways. But, no one wanted to hear that back then. Well, now we're in a world where everyone understands that trauma is very real. There's a trauma-informed approach available. But what started to make my work really unique is when I started bringing the feminine into it. And I started bringing faith and God into it. And that's when I noticed game changing. Everything changed for me and everything changed for the women that I work with. And so that's why I approach this work the way that I do, because I believe that in order to fully self-actualize, no parts can be left behind on this journey. We have to really have the approach or the correct approaches so that we're maximizing our feminine power and potential as feminine women, lovers, and leaders, and really positioning ourselves to experience the intimacy, the impact, and the success that we desire. And so if you are new here, thank you for taking your time to watch this. I'm Casandra Austin McDonald. If I've shared anything that you feel resonates and you feel that someone in your life would find value, if you would share this, I would really appreciate it. And if you're interested in learning how you can work with me to permanently remove any self-sabotaging patterns that are stopping you from experiencing the most fulfilling relationships, greater impact, and more abundance than you ever thought was possible, reach out to me and we can share what options are available. Thank you for being here, and I'll chat with you next time. Take care now.